In 2006, director J.J. Abrams and star Tom Cruise gave the world a stunning return to the world's greatest action franchise.
In 2022, we take a return trip to Japan to try one of its most popular whiskeys.
The film is Mission Impossible 3.
The whiskey is Suntory Toki.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at Mission Impossible 3. Brad, when I saw this on your list, I was freaking pumped because this was the first Mission Impossible movie that really got me into Mission Impossible. You know what I mean? Like, the original came out in 96. Brian De Palma directed. That movie is a freaking banger, but I hadn't seen it growing up. I remember renting Mission Impossible 2, which was a really cool sequel in that they went out and hired John Woo, who was like, you know, kind of blowing up at the time, really famous Hong Kong director. But that movie just is kind of a failure all around. Not a good movie.
It's not good at all.
And then they took a number of years off before they kind of re-kickstarted the franchise with Mission Impossible 3. And I was 15, 16 years old. This was like, I was target demographic for this movie. And I went and saw it in the theater. And man, I was just blown away. And I think that in the 15, 16 years since this movie has come out, a lot of what this movie did has been kind of copied and mimicked. And I think that this movie copied and mimicked a lot of other things too. But for the most part, you could probably release this movie in 2022 and it would still play almost perfectly, where I think the original 96 one, like it has kind of some of those 90s action movie relics. It's still really fun and it totally works, but I don't know if you could get away with like the pacing and the cinematography of the 90s one the way you could get away with this one.
I don't know, man. Tom Cruise's haircut in the first one is like
impeccable.
The most perfect 90s action star haircut.
It's when you could really still get away with rocking like legit sideburns.
Yep.
Like they weren't like mutton chops, but there's something about the sideburns that like we've shorn our sideburns down farther as the years have gone on.
Bob, I am with you though on Mission Impossible 3. I will say though, this is one of the most traumatic movie-going experiences I ever had as a young person, as a teenager.
Traumatic.
Wow.
Okay.
So there's a very specific scene that I will never forget. Do you remember when Ethan in Mission Impossible 3 is making the mixed drinks and he's reading the lips of the party of his wife and they're talking about the lake and he tells him what lake it is?
I sure do.
So I'm watching the movie. We're in theaters, me and my best friend Mike and his dad. We go out to see the new Mission Impossible, super pumped. And the camera cuts back to Tom Cruise behind that little like glass window thing making the drinks. And it stops, and the lights come on, and straight up an EMS team comes down.
Oh my gosh! And
rescues somebody who's having a heart attack in the front of the theater.
Did they defibrillate them? Because I just have to say, like, if they did, then what an immersive movie experience.
It would have been. No, they did not defibrillate. They put him on a stretcher and took him out. And the manager of the movie theater came to the front and apologized, told them that they were praying for the person who was just taken out by EMS, and they would resume the movie in 15 minutes. If anybody wanted a free ticket to another movie, if they wanted to leave, they could leave.
Wow.
So me and my best friend and his dad looked at each other and we were like, I don't know if I'm in the mood for a movie anymore.
Especially a movie where, like, you know, stopping someone's heart is such a huge... It's like this and Casino Royale would be like the two that you really want to avoid.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, we had no idea at that point what was coming for us. It was the most unideal version of foreshadowing that I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, man. Wow. What a crazy story.
That was one of the wildest movie-going experiences of my life.
So I mentioned Casino Royale, and I guess we were probably going to bring it up at some point, but this movie comes out the same year as Casino Royale comes out, and so we're kind of kickstarting the Bond franchise again from scratch, and we're kind of doing the same thing here with Mission Impossible. And Brad, like I saw someone refer to the Mission Impossible series as like the best action series of all time the other day, and it was a critic, and so like it wasn't just a flippant thing they said. And I think movie for movie, even including the low point that is 2, this might be the most consistently good action franchise, and it's one that keeps improving on itself with each successive entry. It's just really interesting to me to think about this movie and Casino Royale coming out in the same year, because both of them went the quote-unquote like gritty route in a way that we hadn't with Bond or with Mission Impossible to this point. There's a lot of overlap in terms of like the storylines, and I just found it really interesting that there were 2 movies that were so similar released in theaters within a few months of each other.
Yeah, it is amazing how like the tides of cinema can move in the same directions, even with completely different crews doing completely different things. And I think with Mission Impossible 3, what you really have is Tom Cruise, in my mind, taking more direct control of the franchise and like pushing it in the directions that he is interested in going in. And the results, in my opinion, is absolutely spectacular.
Well, as we get into talking about it, Brad, we're going to segue into Brad Explains, which is our favorite segment of the show. But before we get there, we do want to encourage you, whether this is your first time listening or you're a long-time listener, check us out on Patreon. You can find us on patreon.com/filmwhiskey, where you can sponsor us at 3 different tiers, a $3, a $5, and a $7 a month tier. At the highest tier, you get completely unique episodes. Brad and I sit down after each and every regular episode, and we record a conversation based on a discussion question on the movie that's just for our $7 subscribers. But at any level, you get a ton of bonus perks, including access to our Discord server, which we plug at the end of every episode. We'd love to have you join the community, so please find us on Patreon. Brad, it's time for Brad Explains. I think it's going to be a pretty easy one. Like, this movie doesn't have a ton of plot going on. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a good old-fashioned, here's a thing, here's a MacGuffin, go find a MacGuffin movie.
Dude, this movie has the greatest, like, expose of the MacGuffin of any movie.
Yeah.
It just straight up at the end of the movie is like, hey, what's this thing we've been chasing? Who knows? Nobody cares.
He's basically like, hey, what's the MacGuffin? And the guy's like, it's a MacGuffin. The Tom Cruise is like, I see what you did there.
Lawrence Fishburne in his perfect voice.
You MacGuffined me.
Yeah.
All right, man. You have 60 seconds on the clock to explain the plot of this movie. Can you do it?
Ethan Hunt is getting married, but he's also a secret IMF trainer who sends people into the field. One of his field agents gets captured, so they go to rescue her in Germany. They fail. They go to chase the guy who killed her in Italy, and they capture him, and then he gets recaptured on this epic bridge fight, and then, let's see what happens after that. The bridge, and then they go to, and then Ethan gets captured by the IMF because he's a bad guy now, and he escapes with the help of his handler, and he goes to China, and he gets the rabbit's MacGuffin, and he gives it back to the bad guy, and the bad guy kills his wife, but then it's not his wife, and he runs a lot. And he shoots the bad guys, and then he kills himself to stop himself from dying. And it's freaking epic. It's the coolest thing in the world, Bob.
Yeah, this movie owns, dude. This is such a good movie. And I went into this movie, like, remembering how much this movie got me excited for the series moving forward. This was like a formative action movie for me. And Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance as, one of the main villains, I remember being completely terrifying, and how he had just come off of an Oscar win, and he was like, I'm doing it, baby. I'm going to make my summer action blockbuster, and just completely owning the screen in a way that when I went to see The Dark Knight 2 years later, I kind of pointed back to Casino Royale and to this movie as, yes, the Joker was something we had never really seen done before, and that tone of movie for a superhero was something we'd never seen done. But I have to give J.J. Abrams a ton of credit in that, the Shanghai sequence in this movie is, almost copied in The Dark Knight in that Hong Kong sequence. and how the villain here felt so much more threatening than most screen villains I'd ever seen. And, so when you get to the Joker, it's like, all right, I got to throw back and give Philip Seymour Hoffman some credit and J.J. Abrams for allowing that performance to kind of take over.
Yeah, the way Hoffman takes this character and runs with it, it really does have that essence of like, I don't even know who you are, don't even really care who you are. I'm just going to destroy you because you are in my way. And that's it kind of feels like a baseline foundation for with Heath Ledger could build upon the Joker. I think that the scene that really got me with Philip Seymour Hoffman, because he doesn't really feature prominently in the film until about like 40 or 50 minutes in, like halfway through the movie. It's after Tom Cruise has taken him in this airplane and he shoves him and the dude's like hanging out of the airplane and Tom's about to kill him. And his team members are shouting at him like, Ethan, what are you doing? And they pull him back up into the plane and he looks at Tom Cruise and he says, Ethan. And the way he says it, you can tell that he is nonplussed. He's not bothered by what just happened. And he now knows who just tortured him. And he's going to make him pay.
Yeah.
And it's just the way he says that in such a cold way. Just, gives me the chills, man.
Well, since we're already diving into performances, let's kind of finish out our conversation on Philip Seymour Hoffman before we move to the rest of the cast. I have to say, if there's a nitpick I have with this movie, it is that it kind of does the Dark Knight Rises thing, where the main villain isn't really the main villain, and you find that out like towards the end of the movie. And I hate when they do that. I hate the fake outs because you build up one villain and it's like, oh, this is an imposing person. And then it's like, no, that's just Darth Vader. Here's the Emperor, And it's like, oh, I got to get concerned about another villain now. And it didn't totally work.
My life is so difficult.
I know. I mean, like, it just didn't totally work for me. But in addition to that, I was really shocked at how little Philip Seymour Hoffman is actually in the movie. Like, I remembered him being a much more dominating presence, and he definitely does, like, when he's there. But he's only really in, like, I don't know, 4 scenes of the movie.
I'm curious, what do you mean by, like, the bait and switch with the villains?
So, like, at the end of the movie, again, this podcast gets into spoilers. So if you have not seen Mission Impossible 3, go watch it. It's a fun ride. And then come back and listen to me reveal that the real villain is Billy Crudup's character, who is Ethan Hunt's boss at the IMF, and that he has been coordinating this thing the whole time. There's a huge reveal at the end of the movie. And you find out that he's basically just using Philip Seymour Hoffman and his underworld cronies like a puppet. It's kind of like the Vader versus the Emperor thing, where, yes, I guess the Emperor is more powerful, but we're more concerned with the battle between Vader and Luke. And in this movie, it's like, oh, okay, so, like, am I supposed to care about the whole Billy Crudup, like, subplot? Or, because I'm over here with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and I want to see him get his comeuppance. And so it kind of pulled me in 2 directions, where I couldn't really tell, like, who's the baddest bad guy? Who's the final boss here?
Who's the final boss? See, I didn't take it that way at all. To me, it felt like Billy Crudup was more of just like an IMF agent who was disenchanted with the system and like was kind of like, I'm still going to get the bad guys, but I'm going to use the bad guys to help get the bad guys.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really take him as like the final boss. Like Philip Seymour Hoffman is the one who gets the cool death. Mm-hmm. Like Billy Crudup just gets shot like a dog by
Michelle Monaghan.
Yeah. Michelle Monaghan. I was about to say Julia Monaghan, which is her character's name,
yeah.
Julia. Michelle Monaghan shoots him at the end, and it's not even like really epic or interesting. It's pretty anticlimactic for him, which kind of fits his character. But so I guess I didn't really have any issues with like who's the bad guy. Like Philip Seymour Hoffman is the bad guy in this movie.
Sure. Did you think that we could have used more of him? Because that was my second point. Like, he just wasn't in it enough for me.
I don't know, man. I think that it's one of those cases of like, there's just enough of him he is very potent in this movie. You only need a few drops of him and he infiltrates the entire film.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think I'm okay with the amount of Philip Seymour Hoffman we got.
Then let's kind of transition to, I want to finish talking about Billy Crudup now too. And I'm pretty sure that's how he pronounces his last name. I've heard Crudup, I've heard Crudup, but I think it's Crudup. We haven't talked about him since Almost Famous. I was really happy to see him here. I really like him. He's a good actor, and he does a lot of theater now. I just kind of wish that the man had gotten the career he deserved in film, because he's just so good. And he
Bob,
came on screen.
You realize that he's made millions of dollars being a supporting character.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But and he probably just doesn't want to do huge franchises. I'm sure he's been offered stuff. He was Dr. Manhattan in the Watchmen movie. So he's been in superhero stuff, but I just wish that we talked about him in the same breath as some of the big actors in Hollywood, because he definitely has the talent for it.
I like that he almost brought out the 20s gangster in you. You literally just said, "Nya."
See? Come and get me, Kappa. All right, so Billy Crudup in this movie. He comes on screen, and I'm like, yes, Crudup's here. And then I'm like, why isn't he in more of these? Does he get killed by someone? What happens? And then I'm halfway through the movie, and I'm like, man, it's so good that they're not leaning into the fact that he can play kind of a dick really well. And I'm like, yeah, I love it when they just leave him as a nice guy. And then the ending happened, and I was like, come on. You can't let the man play against type. So, yeah. Good performance. Ultimately, I'm bummed about where they went with his character. I would have liked to have seen him in at least one more Mission Impossible movie. I thought he was really good.
I thought he was fine. I think that you get different handlers for Ethan, and I think all 6 movies.
Pretty much. Every handler is I'm actually a bad guy.
Yeah. Hey man, they're allowed to play with their own tropes.
Sure.
I guess for me, Crudup didn't add a lot to the movie. He was fine. I think that his best scene is when he's talking to Ethan after Ethan's been captured by the IMF. And he's talking about how disappointed he is in him, but all the while he's, mouthing to him where he needs to go and handing him a knife so that he can escape. I really enjoyed him in that scene. But I think if we're talking about people from the IMF that had really just great performances, I would lean towards Lawrence Fishburne.
Yeah, because he's the person that you think is the bad guy for most of the movie, and you don't really find out that that's false until the very end. He's really good, and they play up that uncertainty really well. Lawrence Fishburne's good in everything. I mean, it's just, you get him in your movie, it's like a home run.
He just has such an incredible voice, and I think it's the way he carries himself that he's one of those people that can immediately fill a room with his presence. And so when he's interrogating them at the end of the Germany mission and accusing them of mishandling things and authorizing operations that shouldn't have been authorized, you can feel the conviction and belief behind his words and his actions, and he just contains so much menace within his figure that he's just phenomenal. And it almost makes his character even better to find out at the end that he really is a good guy. To know that he really believed what he was saying at the start of this. He wants things to be done well rather than impulsively. And so while coming across as the bad guy because of misinformation, he genuinely is a foil for Ethan Hunt. And I think that's what I like about his character is Ethan really is impetuous and crazy and will do anything to win. And Lawrence Fishburne is set up as an antagonist to that, as this controlled, calm, cool-headed, I'm going to win through bureaucracy.
Lawrence Fishburne is one of those actors that can take dialogue that is objectively not good and deliver it so well and so convincingly that you come out of the scene saying that was really clever dialogue.
Yeah.
the scene where he's interrogating them at the beginning of the movie and he's making all these references and just establishing himself as a no nonsense guy. He makes a passing comment about the Invisible Man. And then he looks at Ethan and he's and by the way, that's Wells, not Ellison, in case you thought about being smart again. And it's it's not a very good line. And it doesn't really give you that much more insight into the character other than I'm annoyed. And he delivers it so well that you're this guy, he's really not messing around. So there are certain actors that just have a talent for elevating dialogue to the point where it casts a positive light on the screenwriter. It's just a gift.
Well, yeah, Fishburne is just amazing in this. I think my goal at this point is to talk about every person in the movie other than Tom Cruise.
I was actually kind of gearing us towards that, so let's do it.
All right. I'm in,
All
man.
right, then let's jump over to Michelle Monaghan, because we just talked about her a couple weeks ago with Gone Baby Gone. Talked about how her character was kind of just the supportive girlfriend and how we wished she had a little more to do. And Brad, we fired up this bad boy and found out that she is the supportive wife and doesn't have that much to do.
Hey, man, she hits his chest a few times.
She sure does.
Magically starts his heart.
There's also, like, this is one of those movies where there were a couple moments in this movie, like when Ethan has to drink that potion that knocks him out and he's dizzy. Mm-hmm. There's just like a random overlay of Michelle Monaghan like stripping and like to demonstrate like I'm thinking about my wife, but it's also like this was completely unnecessary. You could have inserted just an image of her face. Like I don't need to see her bare body at all. So like,
hey man,
you know, he wants that honeymoon.
He's recalling fonder times.
Clearly. But yeah, like I did feel kind of bad for her that not only does she not have very much to do, but they were also like, all right, also take your pants off.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you, dude. I think that Michelle Monaghan, I like her more in this than I liked her in Gone Baby Gone. Mm-hmm. I think that she actually shows a little bit of tenacity. And I think that in her small moment of glory, when she kills Tom Cruise, and, you know, he teaches her how to use a gun really quick. You see her in the midst of fear, in the midst of like, I don't know what to do, but I don't know, the way she controls her face, like she controls her breathing. She thinks, she uses the mirror a la Jurassic Park to figure out where the bad guy is. She knows how to reload the gun. Like, I just liked her in that scene. She showed some tenacity and bravado. And I was like, okay, come on, Michelle, let's go. Like you're actually doing something here. So I really liked her in that part. I will also say, you know, the people talk about the John Wick's movie being accurate and, you know, there's only so many bullets in the gun. He tells her that there's 15 bullets.
Yep.
And she shoots 15 times and has to reload. I was like, I counted this time. I was like, all right, come on, Tom Cruise. Yeah. Let's go.
Okay, so let's talk about the minor IMF people. So out in the field with him is Ving Rhames as Luther, who is just fantastic every single time. And they're still wheeling my guy out. He's got to be like almost 70 years old by now. But even in Fallout, they're like, hey, you might not be able to run anymore, but you can defuse a bomb. And he's like, yes, I can. It's just, and in this movie, I feel like is where you really get the depth of the relationship. And this is where I really do see the series kind of take a step in the right direction, because they make it a point to flesh out Ethan's not backstory, but like life away from the IMF. And when they share that moment on the roof in Shanghai, right before Tom Cruise, you know, swings across, it's really heartfelt and touching. And Tom Cruise tells him like, thank you for doing this for me, man. You know, and I don't know, like, I think when this movie takes a moment of respite, it always uses it to its advantage. It always uses it to remind you that these people are, at least in theory, real human beings who have real emotions. And I think Ving Rhames does such a good job of building that camaraderie with Tom Cruise that has carried through to the other movies.
I have two thoughts on Ving Rhames in this movie. First off, the fact that Ving Rhames still comes across as just such a badass after his role in Pulp Fiction is a testament to the just immensity of his acting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. like that's all I'm going to say about that. Secondly, that scene where he's talking to Ethan about Kerry Russell's character, Lindsay Ferris in the movie, and he just flat out asked her, like, hey man, like, was there something going on there? Like, were you guys sleeping together? And Tom Cruise goes, she was like my little sister. And then he just flat out asked him, were you sleeping with your little sister?
Yeah.
and you know, Ethan Hunt just looks at him, and Ving Rhames goes, hey man, everybody needs somebody to ask him those questions. Mm-hmm. That moment, I'm going to philosophize about like the nature of humanity. That might be one of my favorite lines in any movie ever. Like, like I know it might sound dumb, but in that moment, it just hit me at the core of my being of like, yes, like everybody does need to have someone who is willing to ask you the hard questions, who's willing to go into the places and say, hey man, like, I know that humans are messed up and we do dumb stuff. So I'm going to ask you, did you do the dumb thing you shouldn't have done? And that can be on very small levels and it can be on very deep levels. Mm-hmm. And like the fact that Ethan has somebody like that in his life makes him inordinately better of a character than James Bond. Mm. And I think that it gives Ethan a depth and just a believability that somebody cares about him enough to be involved in his life and ask him the hard questions. Like Luther, in my opinion, makes the entire Mission Impossible franchise believable and interesting and
better
and better. Yeah. So yeah, dude, I am 100% in. If there's anybody in the Mission Impossible franchise that's a 10 out of 10 outside of Tom Cruise, it's Ving Rhames.
All right, very briefly, I think this is the first time we see Simon Pegg show up as Benji in the Mission Impossible films. Very clear at this point that they had not figured out his character yet. Like he just doesn't really seem to fit the movie very well. Not really his fault, but they've definitely used him to greater effect in other movies.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point, Simon was still a little bit on the lower end of the movie star totem pole, if you will. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm trying to think, had he done Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz at this point, or was he kind of in the middle of all those?
He had done Shaun of the Dead. I don't think, Hot Fuzz didn't come out till the year after this.
Okay. Yeah, so like he's still in the process of being discovered. And I will say, I think that the Mission Impossible franchise is one of the reason he is discovered as like a really solid actor. And I like him in this. The whole scene he has talking about the anti-god doesn't really fit with the movie very well.
No, and they sure take a long time to just like let him tell that story. Like the whole movie, Tom Cruise is like, I'm in a hurry. And then Simon Pegg's like, let me tell you a story about this professor I had. And it goes on for like 7.5 minutes and they're just staring at him.
It feels like Norm Macdonald's moth joke. like he just keeps going on and on and on. And at the end of it, they're like, what the hell was that?
Right.
And he goes, it's just something I think about when I think of the end of the world.
Okay, the other two people that are out in the field with him are Maggie Q as Jen and Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as Declan, who are both really good and then never get asked to rejoin the franchise again.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, maybe they get killed? No. They just, Tom Cruise is like, I'm done with you now. Yeah. I was kind of surprised. I really liked them both.
I was so disappointed. This is like probably one of my favorite Mission Impossible teams, because they change pretty much every movie, which once again, I'm like okay with that. I like that they switch it up. But I really liked Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Maggie Q. Like the roles that they were asked to play, which, like let's just say if you had each actor make up, a certain percentage of the importance of this movie. So like Ethan Hunt is like 70% importance and everybody else has 30% to make up. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Maggie Q combined make up about 3 or 4% importance of the movie, but they freaking rock it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that they were spectacular. The scene when Ethan and Declan are arguing as Italian delivery men, like Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is spectacular. He's charming. He's funny. He's believable. I really love them so much.
All right. Finally, before we go to break, the most important person in this whole movie, Brad, Kerry Russell. So Kerry Russell shows up for, did you like that? She shows up for about 32 seconds in this movie. And she's like just a big enough star that you could probably be like, hey, people still recognize you, but you're not doing much right now. Do you want to come be in my movie and be the fake out death? And she's like, sure. I gotta say, really good. Like, I wish we had more Kerry Russell in this franchise. When they kill her, spoiler alert, like 10 minutes into the movie, when the explosive inside her head goes off, the face that they have my girl make with the eyes go in each direction is the most unintentionally funny thing I've ever seen. And like when it first happens and they cut away real fast, it's like very gruesome. But then there's probably like 6 or 7 shots where they're just like, you know what we need to see again We need to see Carrie Russell's dead face. And they keep cutting back. And then they cut to a new scene and she's in a body bag and they unzip it and they just dwell on it again. And it's like, after you look at it for a couple seconds, it's like, this is hilarious. I don't know if it's probably just me. I just thought it was really funny and one of the big glaring flaws with this movie.
Bob, I'm gonna give you something here that you need to know. It's not funny at all. It's very gruesome and gross.
It's gruesome, but it's also like, it just looks corny after a while.
You texted me that, and I was like, you texted me that like 5 minutes before I got to that part of the movie, and I was like, really? I was like, I don't remember it. I remember it being pretty like terrifying, like when it happens, like abnormal and strange and weird. And then I got to it and I was like, oh yeah, no, that's not funny at all. Bob is a dark soul.
Yeah. Yep.
You know who they almost had to play this role, but it got messed up?
Who's that?
My girl ScarJo.
Really?
That Scarlett Johansson was cast in that role. And then with production delays and issues that they had, she had to do something else, had to go work on another project, and they got Carrie Russell.
Interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Huh. Well,
which is like interesting because I feel like I don't really know anything about Carrie Russell.
She was on a TV show that was really, really popular for a long time. And then it was one of those things where like the TV show ended and she's done movies. Like she's been consistently working since then, but it was the peak of her career to do that TV show.
Yeah. Okay.
I think was it Felicity? Is that the show?
No, I literally.
Yeah, so the show Felicity, fun fact, the show went downhill because in like the third or fourth season, they gave her like a really dramatic haircut. And it was like the anti-Rachel from Friends where like, everyone wanted the Rachel. They cut Felicity's hair and it like ended the show. Legitimately.
No.
Like the ratings went down so much that they just were like, we're done after this season because they cut her hair.
I feel like that would be like an episode of Community. Like they just completely like change Annie's hair and it causes the entire school to fall apart or something.
All right, man, we're going to press pause here. We're going to come back and talk about the two men at the center of this movie, Tom Cruise and J.J. Abrams. But before we get there, let's try this Suntory Toki. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
All right, today we are checking out Suntory Toki. This is probably the most popular Japanese whiskey from the Suntory line in America. It's relatively inexpensive. It's a blend of two single malts that Suntory makes called the Yamazaki and the Hakushu, and then they blend it with a single grain whiskey called the Cheetah. And you can get all three of those, but they're significantly pricier, so they just blend them here and they release it as a non-age stated thing, and it's way cheaper. So this is a lot of people's introduction to Japanese whiskey. Brad, I believe we've only had 3 Japanese whiskeys on the show up to this point, so this is a realm that we're still relatively new to, but we've had enough scotch, and the production, the process of making Japanese whiskey is so similar that I feel like we can still give some pretty accurate notes on Japanese whiskey. But I always am excited to try another one.
My question is, does this bottle come with a replica samurai on top?
It does not. So we're going to deduct at least 4 points for that.
Easily 4 points off for the chintziest bottling. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's
that I've ever seen.
That bottling is so frustrating because it is like, it's such a gimmick, but it's so well constructed. Like it's made out of metal. It's really nice. And I just think about like, if we were going to export American whiskey to Japan and do the same thing, like what would we just like build a porcelain like fat guy with a trucker hat and like put it on top of your Jack Daniel's bottle?
I feel like it'd be like Paul Bunyan on top of the bottle. Just a big lumberjack with an axe.
Oh, I love it. All right, we're not even talking about this whiskey. Let's get back to this whiskey. Brad, what are you picking up on the nose here?
Oh, man, it's a pleasant nose, Bob. It's got some honey going on, a little bit of peach. There's a little bit of floral stuff going on there, and it's a little bit oaky at the end. So, like, it's nice. It's not overpowering. It's very delicate. I'll give it a 7.5.
Yeah, there is something underlying it, though, that it keeps kind of like undercutting it, where every time I'm thinking like, oh, this is really pleasant. There's some nice like peachy notes on this, and I could really get into this. This has lots of lemon zest. And then underneath all that is like the brine from a jar of green olives, and I can't shake it. Like there's just something heavily green olive about this. And that's something that we've gotten on Scotch before, especially peated Scotch. Like that happened with one of the Ardbegs just a few weeks ago. But here it's really fighting against the super bright fruit notes, and it doesn't seem like they are in harmony with each other. So I think I am going to deduct a few points because of that. I'm only going to give this a 6.5 on the nose.
And then we get into our taste. For me, it's very thin. It's a very soft palate. That honey really comes through. And then for me, it kind of moves into a more earthy, like grass and floral notes.
Mm-hmm.
That's like interesting, but not necessarily my favorite. I'm going to come down a little bit. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, this is really pleasant up front. It has just a bit of tingle, and then it hits like the mid palate, and it's just gone. Like it's just water at that point. And yeah, it's really watered down. This is bottled at 43% ABV, so 86 proof. So it's not the lowest proof that it could be, but it really does seem to have affected something here. I'm not really a huge fan of this, Brad. I like it, and it's a pleasant, like, I could drink this the way that I would drink a beer after mowing the lawn. You know what I mean? Like, It is something that's, like, refreshing, but it doesn't linger at all. So I'm only going to give it, I'll call it a 6 on the taste.
Yeah, and then we have our finish. It's short, it's oaky, and you still have a little bit of that honey lingering. I'm going to stay at a 6 out of 10, Bob.
Yeah, I think a little bit of the malt comes through on the finish, but it's just such a small amount and it fades really quickly. There's not much finish to speak of here. Brad, I think this might be like one of our shortest reviews ever because there's just not a lot to pinpoint here. I'm going to give it a 5.5 on the finish.
Yeah, it really is kind of like the light beer of the whiskey world.
Like literally. I mean, it has the exact same effect on the palate that light beer has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we'll get into balance. I think this is actually like decently well balanced. There's just nothing like outstanding about it. Mm-hmm. I'll give it a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, I'll come up to a 6.5. Like, if we're just talking balance, this is actually probably like an 8 out of 10 for a whiskey that is designed to only be like a 6.5. You know what I mean? Like, it consistently delivers what I think they're going for here. It's just like not a great whiskey. So I'm going to give it a 6.5. When we get to value, Brad, what is this selling for in the state of Ohio?
Well, when I look it up in the state of Ohio, the only thing that comes up for Suntory is Suntory Toki with highball glass.
Mm. So it was like one of those Christmas time packages they give you. Oh, wait, no, it comes up. If you just type in Toki, they've only got it listed as Toki Japanese whiskey. So it's the same price though. It's $36.99.
They don't have it listed under Suntory?
No, it's just called Toki Japanese Whiskey.
Good job, Ohio.
Toki.
Yeah, well, that's my bad for thinking I should search the word Suntory for this whiskey. Sorry about that, Film Whiskey Nation. Yeah, so you said it's $37?
It is.
Okay, so 37,
yeah,
I'll give it a 6 out of 10.
Yep.
It's too much, but I'll say it's a pleasant experience. It's just not much more than that. It's just kind of like a nice little pleasant experience. If this costs like $29.99, I'd be like, oh yeah, sure, great. It's an imported whiskey, $30. It's pleasant. It's fun. And I would honestly probably keep a bottle, to share with friends and be like, hey, this is kind of like a starting point for Japanese whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. I'm going to give it a 6 on value. It used to be closer to $30. I think even a year ago, it was only $34. So it has been slowly increasing in price. And I don't think the quality is there to justify that. So, Brad, I'm coming out to a 30.5 out of 50. I appreciate this for what it is. It just doesn't have much going on in the glass. So it's like, if you dig Bud Light and you want the whiskey equivalent of that, like that's what this is. And I'm not knocking anybody who likes that. If you want something that's much softer and goes away quickly and doesn't linger and isn't going to give you much of a chest burn, start here. Toki is like exactly what you want. But compared to some of the more complex and robust whiskeys we've had, it just doesn't stack up, Brad.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm coming to a 32.5 out of 50. I honestly, I don't know if I would encourage you to try this at a bar. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't know if it would be worth paying, I don't know, $6 to $9, somewhere around there. I don't think it'd be worth paying that much for a shot of this. I think the way I'd say to go about it is like get a few friends who are interested in trying a Japanese whiskey and split the cost of a bottle and just drink the whole bottle on a hot summer's night on the porch and just shoot the crap and enjoy some decent whiskey.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly would recommend buying a bottle before buying a glass of this. Like, I think it's worth, if you're trying to get into Japanese whiskey, this is probably going to be the most available thing by you. And it's a good starting point. Like, there's nothing wrong with having a starting point whiskey. So I would say pick it up. And if you like it, keep getting it, So we're coming out to a 63 out of 100 or a 31.5 out of 50 on average. I'm not going to recommend, other than to say, if you're new to Japanese whiskey, this is the best place to start.
But I will say, if there's a place to start with the Mission Impossible franchise, it might be with Mission Impossible 3.
Well, Brad, let's get into talking about it. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
All right, everybody, that was Suntory Toki, a whiskey that we are not super bullish on. Is that fair?
Oh, totally fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you know what I am bullish on, Brad?
Mission Impossible 3.
2 facts and a falsehood. That's what I'm bullish on.
Yes, you are.
The best segment. I don't know. Would you say this is our best segment, or is it still Brad Explains?
I really like this segment, Bob.
I do too. It's fun.
It's competitive. That's like America's roots.
It is. And there's also like the added bonus of not knowing whether we're going to get fact checked after the fact.
Yeah.
And have to retroactively change scores. Like it's just it's a complete crapshoot, and I love it. It's chaos.
It's absolute chaos, Bob. Are you ready for your 3 facts about Mission Impossible 3?
All right, let's hear it.
All right, fact number 1. While he normally does all stunts on his own, a pair of cracked ribs prevented Tom from performing the majority of stunts in this movie. And the wild thing about this fact is that it set back filming for about a week as they had to find a stunt double. They actually did, in the production process and casting, they didn't find a stunt double for him because he normally does every single one of his own stunts.
Interesting. Okay.
Fact number 2. The role of Benji was originally given to Ricky Gervais, who had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts with For Your Consideration.
Huh.
Fact number 3. While they were filming in Rome, when they were, he was climbing up the wall to get into Vatican City, the production crew couldn't do anything like to officially shoo away all of these inquisitive Italians. And so they set up a phony second unit a little further away, and they hired several women in bikinis and several older women dressed as nuns and pretended to be filming takes for the movie while the main unit filmed Ethan climbing up over the wall into Vatican City.
Huh. I'm not even gonna like go in depth on how I think the other ones go. I'm just gonna say I think 2's the falsehood. And I have no basis for that, but I just can't see Ricky Gervais in this movie. I'm probably wrong, but I'm going to say 2's the falsehood.
Bob, number 2 is not the falsehood.
Oh, wow. Oh, man. They made the right choice.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
They made the right choice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said earlier, think about it. At the time, Simon Pegg was not really super well known, and Ricky Gervais had just created The Office, the British version, and for whatever reason, they wanted him.
Wow.
But he did not do that role.
All right, so what was the falsehood?
Tom Cruise did not have 2 cracked ribs.
Did he do his own stunts?
He did do his own stunts.
Interesting. I will say this is one of the few Mission Impossible movies where I can really see some green screen going on, especially the scene where he's like floating out of the skyscraper with his parachute and kind of plummeting towards the ground.
Yep.
It's pretty clear. Like obviously you're not that's something you can't capture. But especially with where the series has gone since then, and like in Fallout where you like follow him jumping out of a plane and it's very tactile and real.
Yep.
You could kind of tell that they were patching over some areas where he couldn't do a real stunt.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think that if anything, it's that in between time when green screen and CGI just wasn't quite up to standards that you start to see with like Avatar coming out in 2009, 10, 11. So I think that they did the best that they could, but you are 100% right. There's a few issues with the stunt work in this one, but my boy Tommy Cruise still nailed them all on his own.
He sure did, man. Let's save Tom Cruise for the very end, and let's talk J.J. Abrams, because if I'm going to nitpick the movie, I'm going to nitpick J.J. Abrams, and it has become very fashionable to nitpick J.J. Abrams in light of the Star Wars fiasco and the fact that, once he started doing Lost and he developed this whole, what's it called, like the mystery box approach to story writing, he doesn't really do that here. Like, there's a MacGuffin at the heart of this movie, but it's a pretty A to B movie. So I have to give him a lot of credit, and I think that some of these sequences are among the best in the Mission Impossible franchise. Like, they're not done in one long take the way that many of them are now, but the bridge sequence is one of the best action sequences, like just as a set piece of the last 20 years. It's excellent.
It's utterly phenomenal.
There's a great there's a great elevator sequence. People always talk about the Captain America Winter Soldier one. This is a really good elevator fight. I got to give it to him.
Yeah, there's something about setting an action scene in an elevator that it almost reminds me of like when we talked about baseball movies and how everybody knows the geography of a baseball movie. Mm-hmm. Like, everybody knows the geography of an elevator. Mm-hmm. And that might sound like a dumb statement because you might just be like, well, Brad, elevators are tiny and they're this big empty shaft. And I'm like, yes, like that's the point. Like, when you set an action piece in the middle of an elevator, everybody knows that there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And that like the action is fast and brutal and heavy. And then he just freaking pops the top off and starts climbing up the the thing. It's just such a great set piece. And I think that even beyond the action pieces in this movie, like the whole Italy gig, from the point where they have their van fake breakdown and they get into that argument, to the point where they're blowing up this beautiful car to make it look like the bad guy, what's his name? Davian, I think. Mm-hmm. They make it look like Philip Seymour Hoffman died. So like that whole scene, I think might be the best bit of the whole movie. And it's not even the main point.
So I think that Abrams gets a lot of crap for ripping off Spielberg a lot, and it's become very apparent. He made a movie called Super 8. I don't know if you ever saw that movie. Not that great, but it really aped the Spielberg Close Encounters, E.T. kind of, even some of the movies that Spielberg produced, like Goonies. It had all that going on, and he has said for years and years that he wants to be the next Spielberg and that Spielberg's his favorite director, and I think here he shows how to do an homage to Spielberg and to do it well and then to move on. Because there's a sequence where Tom Cruise is trying to escape out of a building with a parachute. And that entire sequence, the way that it's filmed, the way that it's cut together, the visual gags, total Spielberg. Like when Tom Cruise lands in the boardroom, it crashes through a window and lands on a table. And then there's just, it racks focus to the back of the room and there's just a janitor standing there staring at him. Total Spielberg moment. And then the wind picks up and Cruise gets sucked back out the window. Total Spielberg moment. It's a chuckle. And then when he hits the ground and the rabbit's foot goes rolling down the street. Total Spielberg moment. Like, there's just so many in that sequence. But he also knows like when to stop doing that and to get serious again. It's really nice to have that bit of playfulness in the movie. I just wish that Abrams did a better job of, in general, of knowing when to do homage and when to stop. Do you know what I mean?
And when to do his own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the issue with Abrams, right? Is that he just doesn't really do his own thing. For me, my issue with JJ in this movie is like, I'm just going to ask you a simple question, Bob. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
How much shakier could the shaky cam have gotten in this shaky cam movie?
Oh my gosh. So here's the thing with me that I was surprised to see him doing was this was Abrams trying his best to make a Michael Bay movie. And it's really apparent towards the beginning of the movie in that kind of Germany exfil sequence. Like it is shot like a Michael Bay movie. They're going for the kind of grittiness. They do the high contrast thing. Everything kind of has like a greenish filter on it. All the buildings in this movie are very industrial and they're either like really grimy or they're like really shiny on the inside. It's total Michael Bay. And it makes me kind of wonder, like, I don't know a lot about the production history of this movie or what's rumor or what's not. I kind of wonder if Cruise had gone into this movie thinking like we need Bay for this movie or we need something like him, because Abrams doesn't really make another movie that looks or feels like this. But Brad, like I sent you a YouTube video to watch that was breaking down Michael Bay's visual style, and you can't tell me that Abrams wasn't just directly trying to copy him.
No, 100%. I do know that originally it was supposed to be David Fincher who was going to direct Mission Impossible 3.
Interesting. Okay.
Which, yeah, would have been absolutely wild. And then replacing Fincher was Joe Carnahan.
Okay.
And he was actually in production for up to 15 months. But it took so long that he moved on and just wasn't down with it. And so they finally got J.J. Abrams. So
interesting.
There you go. Huh. No Michael Bay. But I would be curious because the way J.J. plays it off, there's just explosions everywhere and the camera movement feels similar to Bay. I'm with you, dude. The movie screams like Michael Bay all over it. But I will say this. I think it works.
Mm-hmm.
Like the opening action scene, man, the way they show the guns, the turret swiveling, it kind of has like a Star Wars feel to it. Or what was the Pearl Harbor?
Yeah,
that Michael Bay did. Like the way the turrets are spinning around and then shooting into it, like it just has a heavy feel to it.
Agreed.
And it's just cool.
I will say, like, there are some moments in this movie that I was really surprised at, like in a pleasant way. The needle drop of "We Are Family" coming on the boombox. It's really,
very strange.
It's really funny though, because then they cut outside and it like JJ just blasts it like it's the soundtrack of the movie.
Yeah,
and they don't do that kind of thing in Mission Impossible movies. And so I kind of liked it. I was like, yeah, screw it. Like, let's do something fun for the next 10 seconds, and then we're back into the action again. For me, I think this movie still works, Brad. Is it the best Mission Impossible movie? No. Is it is the ending maybe a little bit of a letdown for me? A little bit, but it's a really good movie. And what it all comes back to is Tom Cruise. Like, there's not much more we can really say about Tom Cruise that we haven't said in other episodes. I mean, Edge of Tomorrow, we raved about the guy. He's so good, Brad. He is like the platonic ideal of a summer blockbuster actor.
And he also binge watched the first 2 seasons of Alias and then called J.J. Abrams to direct this movie.
I can see it.
Right?
He had foresight.
Dude, Tom just has this impeccable way of being absolutely just easy about everything he does. Like, he makes everything look so smooth. And like for a series called Mission Impossible, he just has a way of making the impossible things look possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why he's so daggone good in these movies, is like he's just hyper focused, hyper in control of himself as an actor, like Tom Cruise as an actor and Ethan Hunt as a character.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just no way to explain the Mission Impossible franchise without explaining Tom Cruise as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if there's been ever a character that is so fully embodied by the actor who plays it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just spectacular.
Brad, I think I'm ready to go into final scores. Do you want to go first or do you want me to?
I'll go first. It's my movie. I think that this movie is just flat out spectacular. It is fun. It is crazy. Tom Cruise's running is spectacular in this movie. I've never seen an actor who can run with better sprinting form than Tom Cruise. Like, he just looks impeccable while he does it. I think that the scene where Michelle Monaghan kills him by sending a shock through his body is one of the most like violent shots in movie history, and it's spectacular. I love this movie. There are issues with it. It is not a perfect Mission Impossible movie. But the reason I picked it for this season is just because, man, oh man, I just think this is a blast of a movie. It never stops. It never quits. It just moves you from place to place to place and has action set piece after action set piece to keep you moving. I love this film, Bob. I will give it a 9.5 out of 10.
Wow. That's awesome, man. Yeah. So here's the thing about this movie is that I think everything about it works. Like there's nothing about it that doesn't work, but there are degrees of like, this works less than this. Does that make sense? Like,
100%.
And for a movie to be a 10 out of 10, I feel like everything has to work and it has to work almost to maximum capability. And so for me, the thing that is going to bring it down just a little bit is that the ending of the movie is just not as strong as it should be. And for me, it's the fact that they really kind of took Crudup's character and made him the brains of the operation, which left Hoffman just as like big brutish guy that had a grudge. And, you know, it just kind of devolves into the scene of him like beating up Tom Cruise and being like, "Didn't I tell you, Tony?" Like just punching him, you know, like Jeff Bridges. and it just, that didn't work for me. And it's because the plot of the movie kind of falls apart if you give it any thought towards the end of the movie. Like the thing that's driving Davian is that he's pissed off at Cruise for the way that Ethan interrogated him. Like, you hung me out of a plane, you disrespected me. But Ethan was only doing that. Ethan only interrogated him in the first place because Crudup's character sent them to get him. And then that really makes you think like, wait a minute. When you break down Billy Crudup's character's motivation, which is like, we're going to take the rabbit's foot, we're going to let it be sold by Davian to this Middle East buyer. We're going to use that as an incentive to go start a war and implement a democracy in this Middle Eastern country. It kind of makes the IMF completely superfluous to the whole thing. Like, why did you ever involve the IMF in any way? Like, why couldn't you have just let Davian keep the rabbit's foot, sell it to the person you know it was getting sold to, and then started your war? Like, I don't understand the plan at all because, do you know what I mean?
I think you might have missed one key line, Bob, because Billy Crudup's character didn't actually send them to get Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. Because if you remember, Benji finds that he's going to Rome the next day to Vatican City, and Tom Cruise tells him, "Don't tell Crudup about it because I want him to have deniability." So he didn't actually send them to go get him.
That's right. Okay.
So I don't know, man. I think Ethan made an enemy all of his own because he's trying to figure out who the mole is in the IMF.
I did forget about that line. You're right. Okay, it makes more sense. I'm still gonna give the movie an 8.5 out of 10. I think it works really, really well. But like, if Fallout is a 9.5, and the original for me is probably like somewhere between an 8.5 and a 9. I think this is just a hair below that. I need to rewatch 4 and 5 because 4 is the one where he climbs the Burj Khalifa. And 5 is it's awesome.
So cool.
5 is the one where they do the thing at the Kremlin, but I don't remember like anything else that happens in either of those movies. And so they're kind of nebulous. Like, I don't know what my ranking would be, but just of the ones I remember, like Fallout's at the top. Number 1 is underneath that. 3 is beneath that. And then there's like, 30 feet. And then there's 2 at the bottom. So yeah, I'm going to give it an 8.5. I think it's a great movie. We're coming out to an average of a 9 out of 10, but we'd like to know what you think. So please let us know. If you've seen Mission Impossible 3, where would you rank it among the Mission Impossible films? What kind of score would you give it? You can find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Whiskey.
Or you can jump on our Discord. We are on there every single day talking to the fans of the Film Whiskey podcast. So get on our Discord. It is found at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, we are going to wrap up my list with a movie from the director Barry Jenkins that I think didn't get the love it deserved. It's called If Beale Street Could Talk. Very different movie from Mission Impossible 3, but we're going to wrap up my list, and then we'll be back for our final episode, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. So that kicks off next week, and for the Film and Whiskey podcast, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.